I first discovered the story of Ben Hall in 2007. I was with a friend of mine called Alex, and we were writing another screenplay together. And during our conversation, I was lamenting the fact that they had already made an Ed Kelly film in 2002, and how I'd always wanted to make an Ed Kelly film, and now that they'd done that, I felt I'd lost my chance. And he turned to me and said, well, you know, there are a lot more interesting bushrangers out there than Ned Kelly. You know, look at Frank Gardner, Ben Hall, Johnny Gilbert. And I'd never heard of these names before. So that very afternoon, I went straight home, jumped on Wikipedia, and discovered this bushranger that I didn't know anything about prior to this. And I was just fascinated. Not only because the story itself was so interesting, the character itself was so fascinating, but the fact that I didn't actually know anything about this character before. Within a few days, I had bought up every single book that I could find on the internet of Ben Hall, and a couple of weeks later, I was writing a screenplay. What made the Ben Hall story seem so right for a movie was really the character himself. He was just such an interesting protagonist because he wasn't really a bad guy, but neither was he a good guy. Clearly an outlaw, but there was something else different that was motivating him, that made him someone that, for me, on the page, I just kept wanting to learn more about him. So I thought that would probably translate really, really well into a film. On top of which, his story is surrounded by betrayal and romances and action and all this sort of stuff. So it was like almost like a big novel of stories and characters all interconnecting and so on. I really started to take a lot of ownership in the Ben Hall story and really became very, very passionate about it and wanted to see that it was done right. Historical films that deviate from history, they annoy me. There's nothing more frustrating for me as a viewer to watch what claims to be based on a true story, and as soon as the movie finished, you jump on Wikipedia to learn more about it, and then you realise that the filmmaker has taken all these liberties and they've changed characters and they've changed events, and sometimes I read that the true story is more interesting than the fiction, and you sort of wonder, well, why did they deviate? So I thought, wouldn't it be exciting and wouldn't it be really, really different to tell an historical story but stick to the facts this time and play it out for how it played out and not embellish it? I think the biggest reason why I feel that historical accuracy is so important in a movie is because movies are a window to the past. Now, if I'm telling a story that claims to be true, I feel there's a responsibility as a filmmaker to tell it truthfully. And if I feel the need to change the story, then I wonder, why am I telling this true story? It's obviously got a problem with it, but for me, I had no problem with anything to do with the Ben Hall story. I was in love with every bit of it. A lot of people have asked me, you know, don't you find it really difficult to stick to historical accuracy? And I've said, no, I actually find it very hard to go off track. When I was shopping the script around in the early days to different producers, I had a lot of people criticising me for being historically accurate. You know, people were saying things to me, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story and all that sort of thing. And I knew I was making the movie for people like me, people who cared about Ben Hall, people cared about this bushranger history, and they're out there, people that care about this history, and some of them even more than me. So I knew if I could make the movie for them, but also make it an entertaining film and an engaging and emotionally engaging film, well then I'm going to be pleasing both audiences. I wanted someone to sort of help me as a consultant who could actually, you know, read my script and guide me through it. And very soon after learning about the Ben Hall story and buying up all these books, I of course discovered Peter Bradley, who is a Ben Hall researcher, historian. So I rang up Peter Bradley pretty much out of the blue and just told him who I was, what I was doing. And he was very, very open to the idea of consulting. He thought the idea of a Ben Hall film was a great idea.
Well, we grew up out in the Forbes district, a couple of thousand acres of wheat and sheep, quite close to the place where Ben Hall was killed. And going to school out there, we knew about Ben Hall. And in fact, my mother's name was Hall, but according to my mother, there was, oh no bushrangers in our family at all. It wasn't until probably not more than 10 years ago that I happened to be at a cousin's place, just reading one of Edgar Pensig's books, in fact, and my cousin said, "We're related to him." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "We're related to Ben Hall." So the discovery for me that we were in fact related to Ben Hall, not having done any family history, was only a few years ago. And actually having a degree in modern history, not particularly bushrangers, I started looking more closely at Pensig's book, and I found a few things there that didn't quite, some of Edgar's conclusions didn't quite add up. So the idea was that I would research that a little bit more closely, and then the result was one book, first of all to identify the informant, which we did, and then wrote another book about the history of Ben Hall and the background and their relationships with others.
And over the next 7 years, I would just ring him up on occasion, and he'd always just be there to, anytime I needed to know a big or a little detail about any aspect of the history, he was always there to answer it.
Matthew, having sent me draft copies of the script, I would then read those and perhaps comment on the characterisation, the accuracy of place names, relationships between different people, and just the historical accuracy of different events.
And the thing that I discovered is that I couldn't condense this history down into a 2-hour movie. My first screenplay was about 300 pages long, and after a bit of an edit I got it down to 250, and then weeks and weeks more of editing I managed to get it down to 180. So it was very, very clear that this was going to be a very, very big movie, and in my mind I was thinking this is going to be a $30 million epic. But that didn't stop me starting to shop it around to some producers. The response was pretty lackluster. Some were thought, oh yeah, that could make a good film, but Ben Hall's not very well known. Who is he? Do we need another Ned Kelly film? And a lot of them were also critical of the size and the fact of how big the production was. And pretty much across the board, everyone said, "You'll never get this movie up as your second film. It's too expensive. Forget it." I kind of felt I had to accept that and sort of put Ben Hall on the shelf for a bit of time. In 2014, I decided to make a short film about Ben Hall. This was motivated just really because I wanted to play around in the Ben Hall world for a while and get my hands dirty in that. I just made a short film called The Artifice in early 2014. I had a lot of fun doing that. And so I thought, oh, well, let's do something again, but let's get a little more ambitious this time. So I decided to take the last 15 pages of my Ben Hall, my great big Ben Hall script, and see if I could just sort of adapt that into sort of at most a 20-minute film that sort of played out a little bit like a dramatised documentary. Before I launched the crowdfunding campaign, I thought it would be a good idea to actually cast Ben Hall first. So I put out a casting call on a number of various internet sites and so on, looking for someone who looked like Ben Hall and also who could portray him. I did end up getting lots and lots of applications. Dozens and dozens of actors were contacting me and sending me their show reels and their headshots, but none of them looked like Ben Hall.
I had a friend who knows that I love biopics, and she sent me the casting notice that Matt put up for Ben Hall and said, "Here's a really cool project that I found. What do you think of it?" And I read it and I thought it was really cool, but to be honest, I didn't think I looked anything like Ben Hall at the time, so I wasn't going to apply. And I just let it sit there for a few days, and then, I don't know why, but I just did.
I was actually on holiday in New Zealand and I got an email from Jack Martin pretty much out of the blue on one rainy day in my hotel room. Opened it up and here was his application for the role, and also attached was his headshot. Now the minute I opened that up and saw Jack's face, I immediately saw the face that I was looking for. To me, I saw Ben Hall.
He said, "Thank you for the application. I'm in New Zealand, so I won't be able to look at it for a couple of weeks."
But I was so interested to see if this guy was the right guy that I had to just contact him back again straight away and say, can you send me anything you got, like show reels, auditions, anything like that. Now, the interesting thing about those is that the quality of these auditions and these short films was quite varying. A lot of them weren't very, very good. But the thing that struck me as interesting is that Jack was really, really good in those. And so I immediately thought, well, if he can act this well in these kind of films, I think he's got the acting chops. So I was pretty convinced straight away that he had the intensity and the acting ability to pull off this role.
He took a shot on me without even auditioning me, which was really cool.
I just said to him, you know what, you've got the part. I know you can act, you look terrific. I don't want you to fly all the way down to Melbourne just to audition for something that I'm already going to give you, so come on over and let's do a photo shoot. So he came straight to Melbourne and we did a photo shoot where we recreated the Ben Hall photograph, the very famous photograph of Ben Hall. We rented a costume and we got a little studio together, and I got a couple of friends to help me recreate that photograph as accurately as possible. And the idea behind that was subconsciously to tell people that if we could recreate this photo really, really accurately, there would be this subconscious belief that I could recreate the movie really, really accurately. And of course, we took some more photographs of Jack, as Ben Hall out in a field one afternoon, because I really felt that, film is a visual medium, so the more images I could provide for people and the more I could show that this film looked like it was happening, it's not just an idea and some words on a paper, that it would really excite people.
When I first started talking to Matt, he said, I want this film to be as close to historically accurate as possible. I want to make sure that every detail we research thoroughly, and that was one of the main draws for me from the beginning, because I thought that's a really cool and unique detail to be involved in, as opposed to a lot of other historical films that just go, I'm just going to take a few events and then just build whatever I want around it.
So we launched our Kickstarter campaign about mid-2014, and it was an all or nothing, which meant that if we didn't raise the $75,000 that we were going for, we would not succeed. Even if we raised $60,000, we wouldn't get it. And I know I had a lot of people who thought I was quite mad to go for $75,000, but I honestly just felt that if I didn't get the right amount of money, I couldn't do it justice. And if it was going to be any kind of show reel for a potential feature film later on down the track, it had to be really, really good.
It was just a case of trying to get as many people to see it as possible. So that included contacting media agencies, newspapers, putting posters up even. There was a point where Matt drove from Melbourne and I drove from Sydney to meet in Forbes, which is of course Ben Hall country. And along the way we were putting posters up and visiting the rural towns that had, historical connection to the events, and trying to build a following there, which was going to be, our base, or where we thought people would be most interested.
We did get a pretty good response to it from the beginning. We did get a lot of people putting money in, but it really wasn't climbing as high as I thought it was going to. And I think by about week 2, I was thinking, man, if we keep going on this trajectory, we're not going to get there. We're not going to reach $75,000. We'd maybe raised $10,000 or $15,000, which was really quite extraordinary in and of itself. But there was still this other 50 to go, and only 3 weeks to do it in. I pitched the film to the Forbes Shire Council. I got the opportunity for me and Jack to drive up to Forbes and present the project to the council in one of their chamber meetings. And so we ran our video for them, and I gave a little speech and told them that we're looking for financial support, and if they were to financially support the film in some way, then we would premiere the movie at Forbes, and you can use the movie for promotional materials and stills for any tourism, and sort of pitched it in a way that would appeal to them as a bit of a something to really generate tourism and interest in the region. They thanked us for their presentation, and Jack and I went away, and I think we only had a couple of weeks left on the campaign, and we weren't even at our halfway point. And I think Jack and I were starting to feel that this really wasn't going to happen. But 3 hours later, we get a phone call from the Forbes Shire Council saying, we're going to give you $10,000 towards it. And that just boosted our numbers really, really high. And straight after that, we started getting a succession of people putting in very, very large cash injections. We had a New York-based independent film production company called Palmerium LLC. They put in about the same amount.
That was probably the turning point, actually. And then within 2 or 3 days of that trip, even though it seemed like a disaster, everything kind of turned. We got a couple of decent people pledging towards the film, and then, it just kind of snowballed from there.
And we actually over-financed the film up to about $120,000. We were now making, rather than a 20-minute film, we were now making a 45-minute short feature. Certainly took everyone by surprise who was involved, and so, thus armed, we headed straight into pre-production. When it came to looking for John Gilbert, just like Ben Hall, I very much had it in my mind that I wanted to find an actor that looked like the real historical character. I was flicking through Star Now and looking at a bunch of actors around a certain age who were in Melbourne, and I came across Jamie Coffer's headshot. And the minute I saw it, it jumped out to me as John Gilbert.
In April of 2014, I was contacted by the director Matthew Holmes, and I knew nothing about bushrangers. All I knew was Ned Kelly, and that was it. And then, so I replied back and I said, look, I can't meet the two requirements that you have, which was you have to have long hair, because my hair was short, and I can't ride a horse.
He just had such the right face that I really felt that if this guy has got the acting ability, he would just be perfect. So I arranged to meet Jamie Coffer down at the Docklands one Sunday morning, I think. But when I got there, I discovered that the cafe that we were supposed to meet at was completely closed, and there were no other cafes open in the whole area.
And so he's like, that's all right, let's just go across to the park. And the park was kind of secluded. And to be honest, I thought it was the sussiest thing I'd ever done. Because we sat down, and so he started to talk about the film, what he'd done before and everything. And all I could think of was, God, I hope he doesn't stab me or shoot me or mug me or anything. And so he's talking to me, I'm just going, yeah, oh, that's great, Ben Hall, yeah, so if I run that way, he won't be able to catch me.
Much to my surprise, Jamie was such a quietly spoken guy. He was really, really shy and reserved and very well mannered and everything. The complete opposite to what you think of Johnny Gilbert. So I thought, man, I wonder if this guy can actually pull off the role of John Gilbert when he's naturally just such an introvert. I asked him to go away and do some self-audition tapes.
I had my sister read all the other characters. I had my other sister record me on my little phone. And then the next day I put it all together and I sent it off to him at about 10 o'clock at night.
And I opened them all up and watched each one of them and was completely surprised at how much he had transformed and how much he had got the essence of the character of John Gilbert, this flamboyant, over-the-top, highly energetic little psychopath. And clearly, Jamie had the ability to pull this character off. So as soon as I watched them, I contacted him straight back and said, "You've got the role, mate."
But the problem was I went to bed. I closed my computer down, so I never got the email. And then he texted me 3 times. But my problem was that I thought it was my mother texting me, asking me, how's your day, la 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 la. So I didn't pick up the phone. And so the third time the thing went off, my phone, I went, oh, for God's sake. So I picked it up, and the text read as this. First one was, you've got the role, mate, if you want it, question mark. So I've never called anyone back faster before. I was just reading and just...
Will was cast very, very late in the process. We were very, very close to when we really needed to start shooting, and I still hadn't found an actor for John Dunn. Jamie and Jack were not experienced horse riders, and I really wanted an actor who could ride a horse. So we did put out this casting call saying, horse rider needed must look like John Dunn, and that was a very, very difficult ask. And to find someone so specific, Will was very much looking for a role where he could do his horse riding skills and combine them. So he leapt at the opportunity and sent me his photograph, and I was very, very surprised when I saw that he did look remarkably like John Dunn in the face.
I spoke to Matthew after being tagged on a Facebook post, which Matthew had put up online saying, do you want to be a part of the Ben Hall film? So I quickly looked up who Ben Hall was, because in Australia we don't get taught who Ben Hall is, unfortunately. It was really interesting to look at a picture of John Dunn and see the similarities in our image, and to go back into his history and to see that he grew up on a farm with horses, and that his life started with horses. He was an ex-jockey, and I was a horse riding competitor when I was a kid. I did quite well when I was young, so I just thought it was amazing, the comparison. And I fought for the role.
However, he was a little bit older. He was sort of getting towards his mid-20s when the character of John Dunn was 17. We met and we spoke for a while and about the role and the character and so on, and I did like William for the role, but because of his age and so on, I was not quite ready to commit.
Said, if you cast me in this role, then we will make it work, and I will make it work, and I will be John Dunn, and nobody else can play John Dunn like I will.
Okay, cool. Well, if you want to do the role, this is what we need. We need you to look younger. We need to lean you down. You need to shave your beard and grow your hair out and all this sort of thing.
I offered to lose 10 kilos. I went back to the farm, started riding horses after 10 years. That was a really interesting moment for me to fight for a role like that, because normally it would be considered arrogant or cocky, but at this point I didn't feel like it was that. It was just meant to be, and I really had to make sure that I got that role.
I knew Joanne Dobbin because her mother had done the makeup for the short film I'd done earlier in the year, and Joanne actually came out and helped. And I also knew that she was an aspiring actress.
I originally got involved when the film was a short film, and Matthew actually contacted me in regards to the role of Biddy. And after reading the script, I really felt like I was visualizing it. I was there. I could see the characters, I could see their facial expressions, I could see everything about the story I could see.
She was the first and only actress that I gave Biddy Hall to audition for. And much like Jamie, I just said, here's the script, can you go away and provide some self-audition tapes? And yeah, she was really, really good. She had the right sort of energy for the role. She had the right sort of sassiness and the attitude that Biddy Hall needed, and also that inner strength that the character really, really needed.
Biddy was a really strong, wild-spirited character. She was very fiery, very assertive to her men. In those hard times, she could really take on board what she had.
I became involved with Legend of Ben Hall. I've known the director, Matthew Holmes, for about 5 years or something. He actually saw me in a show that I was doing many years ago back in Adelaide, and approached me after the show and said, I really like your style, let's make a movie sometime. And there's been various projects in the pipelines, and eventually this project came up, and Matt actually got in touch with me and said, look, I've got a role, I think you're perfect for it, if you want it, it's yours. So I had read the script, loved the character, so I said, absolutely, I'd love to be involved. In terms of researching for this film, it was sort of an endless endeavour, really, and was really exciting because it's obviously based on true lives, true stories. Once I started to uncover some of these incredible historical books, of which there are a few around, it was just like a gold mine. And there was, working as a police officer in the film, there was huge amounts to learn about the police force at that time in Australia. I spent hours and hours at the State Library of Melbourne, just trawling through material. Any little mention of Davidson, pulling that out, family history. And also there was a big shift happening in the police force around that time, between the sort of more rogue police officers and trying to really establish a genuine, legitimate police force. And Davidson really represents part of that movement. So understanding what that was like as well was a huge part of the research.
I've worked with Adam Wilson on, I think, every single film project I've made in the last 10 years. But the thing with Adam is his strength is in comedy. But I've always felt that if you're really, really good at comedy, you're going to be good at drama. And I thought in the character of Mick Connolly, here was a chance for Adam to really flex his dramatic muscles.
So Matt gave me a call in early 2014 and said, look, I've got this part that I think you'd be great in. If I can get the funding for it. And then he sent me a photo, and there's this big, bushy colonial figure. I went, oh, okay, well, what are we going to get, a beard? And then, the next message was something like, so start growing that hair and start growing that beard.
And surprisingly, once we dyed his hair black and his beard black and everything, I was really surprised how much Adam Wilson actually, how much he really looked like him. In the case of Gregory Quinn, I'd already worked with him earlier that year on The Artifice, and having enjoyed that experience, knew that Greg has an intensity and likes playing roles that have an intensity, and so the role of Sergeant Condell just seemed sort of custom made for Greg.
I'm an Australian bushranging historian and researcher. I've studied bushranging for the majority of my life, in particularly the Ned Kelly story. Naturally, my interest was there, and I approached the director and offered my assistance in any way I could to help him make the film as historically accurate as possible, and was quite surprised when he asked me to instead apply for a role. So yeah, here I am now as a bushranging sympathiser dressed up as a trooper.
Well, I was speaking to Matthew for quite a while now, so yeah, about a year or so. Yeah, so I've actually been planning this for a while. Have a go at being a tracker. My character is Billy Dargan. We got quite a few troopers that we all together trying to catch, track down Ben Hall. So none of them couldn't track down, so they had to bring some Aboriginal trackers along. So I very much like it, all right. Yeah, it's a change to play a tracker.
I used to make films with my friends when I was in high school, and I loved drama and all that part of the creative arts, but the world I was in at the time didn't believe that was a viable option. So I found myself jumping around a bit and looking for different options. I had helped out on a couple of music videos with friends, and production managed a music video, and that was the extent of it. 3 months later, I met Matt and was on Ben Hall, so it all happened quite quickly. He was currently producing by himself and was looking for some production help, and Sam put my name forward, and Matt and I talked, and Matt brought me on board as production manager at the time. But as the project grew from a 25-minute short to a 40-minute short, my role expanded as the project did.
I just went to Jess and said, do you have aspirations to be a producer? And she said, absolutely, that's where I want to go. And I said, well, here's your chance. Do you want to be a producer on The Legend of Ben Hall and help me with this?
Action! Take two, B-Boy.
Being a bushranger film, having horses and coaches was going to be a vital part to the film, and perhaps was going to be the most challenging thing as a very low budget short film. But I knew Bruce and Ivana, who ran Australian Movie Livestock. I had been talking to them about another film project, and when this Legend of Ben Hall film came up, I started talking to them about the possibility of them providing the horses and the coaches, and for the short film it wasn't a very large quantity of them. They were very, very open to doing it because they liked the Ben Hall story. Ivana had worked on the 1975 Ben Hall series, and so they were very open to jumping on board. And honestly, if we hadn't got them right at the very beginning, then I probably wouldn't have even proceeded to do the crowdfunding campaign, knowing their contribution to the film was going to be vital.
And then the main thing I had to learn was horse riding. At the age of 7, I went on a pony, and that was it. I'd never been on a horse again, so I actually had to learn. And in the first year of filming in 2014, I was probably a walking disaster on a horse.
Yeah, it was challenging, especially having to learn in such a short period of time. I'd gone on a trail ride with a friend a few months before, and I thought, that's fine, that's easy. So when I started talking to Matt, I was like, yeah, I can ride, thinking that that's all there was to it, just being on the horse. I quickly learned that that's not really how it works, and I had to pretty much start from scratch, not just to be able to ride, but to be able to look like I grew up on a horse. Ben Hall was known as a a really capable horseman. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to find a way to look like I'm a really capable horseman.
Costuming for me and wardrobe is so important in a period film like this, because if your costumes aren't correct, if they look off, then your audience is not going to buy the reality that you're presenting. So I wanted someone who was really onto the historical accuracy of costuming. Our costumes were provided by one of Australia's leading costume designers, Michael Chisholm. He agreed to come on board if we raised the money for through Kickstarter. And when he opened up his warehouse, there was this amazing collection of period clothing, just racks upon racks, this treasure trove of period wardrobe. So we were in really good hands with Michael. It's all because of his attention to detail and his perfectionism for getting this period correct, just made him the best person to have on board.
Trying to make what I was wearing as well be what I'd always worn. And being in clothes that I've never worn before because they're from 150 years ago, and trying to make them personal and make me comfortable in them, as opposed to feeling like I've just put a costume on and not really knowing how the belts work or not knowing where the gun goes. Same goes with the horses, trying to make everything second nature, as if I'd grown up with that stuff, as Ben Hall would have.
Matthew and I started our filmmaking ventures all the way back in high school. We basically started with making these little silly films that inspired by, as that we like to call, which pretty much meant that we just try to copy scenes out of movies and try to shoot them. So all our favourite blockbuster movies like Aliens, Terminator 2, but that's where we learned the foundations of filmmaking. Like how to shoot and edit and put sound effects on and things like that. So we just taught ourselves how to do that, and that sort of motto has pretty much lasted our entire career as filmmakers.
When pulling together a crew of people, you really want people that you work really well together. And so for me, that's one of the best things about Peter, is that we both came from this sort of independent filmmaking background where you had to make things work with what you had, unlike other cinematographers who are used to working with a $50,000 gaffer truck parked nearby with all the tools.
The short film, it was an interesting period as far as the life of the Ben Hall film, because for me it was the beginning of finding a whole new crew and trying to see how we're going to gel and how it's all going to work, because when we make a little short film for 2-3 days, it's not as much of a issue, but when you're working in a long term, like the 3-week shoot that we had for the short film, you had to gel and last these 3 weeks without killing each other. So with the short film, the difference was that all the budget was spent on all the logistics and costumes and things like that. We weren't actually being paid, so it was a passion project for everyone to get involved, and whether you had people with huge amount of experience or as little as coming straight out of film school, we had people that were focused to make sure that they still do their best they can.
Because we were a low budget film, and the most expensive thing was horses and coaches, it made sense that we sort of based the production around where the horses were based as much as possible. Bruce Nirvana lived down at Kyneton, which is about an hour out of Melbourne, and so what we decided to do is sort of make sort of the Kyneton region our base and film everything within about a 25-minute radius. Being a regional shoot, we needed to house our cast and crew for the shoot, and so looking around the area, about 15 minutes away from Bruce Nirvana, was a place called Campaspe Downs, which is basically a place where they hold school camps. So it had a lot of dormitories, it had a big mess hall, and it had a lot of these kind of facilities that were really quite perfect for a film crew. We ended up sort of taking over this big mess hall as our own, and we put makeup in one corner, we had wardrobe in the other corner, it was the sort of the kitchen eating area in another corner, and then it was props and cameras in the other corner.
So very communal living, big communal dining area, and we all stayed at that one location, and as a result, every night after filming, we'd all come back together, we'd all have a big meal together, we'd all socialise for a couple of hours, discuss what had happened in the day, maybe discuss what's going to happen the next day, and you don't get to do that very often on film. It's not that same vibe, you've got people off in hotels, people off in their own private world doing their own private thing, where this was such a community feel. That was the best time for me. I mean, as much as I loved filming the movie and as much as I loved making the movie, the actual social aspect of it I think, is what's actually made the movie what it's become, because it formed a connection between everybody. And as a result, when it came to those hard days and the tough days where you're really working and someone wants you to do that thing one more time, it was easier to do it because you were doing it for a friend as opposed to just doing it for, you know, that guy because he's telling you to do it.
While it started off as a very, very fun process and everyone had a lot of energy, we found that as we were going into our second week, it was really starting to take its toll on everybody. And it was a very, very challenging shoot. I don't think anybody, even myself, really realised how big this production was going to be, and we really were understaffed. And we really didn't have enough money to do what we were doing. We had bitten off a little bit more than we could chew.
It was a very hands-on process, and finding myself on set daily, helping out wherever I could. I think because I was so new to producing, I didn't have any expectations of how things were supposed to run, and I think that worked in my favour. It was, okay, we want to get this done, how do we do it?
Probably the biggest challenge of shooting the short film was we were shooting in August. August in Victoria is still quite cold. It's not the dead of winter, but you're coming out of it. And secondly, they were really, really long days, and we were having to cover a lot of material in a short amount of time. We were going into night shooting as well. We had a lot of crew coming and going because everyone who was working on the short film was working for free. No one was getting paid.
We were just trying to get people in when they were available, and I think in the short, the camera department copped it the most. I think we had an AC changing every second or third day.
By the end of it, turned out to be one of the most difficult 3 weeks of my life, and I remember thinking that if this is what filmmaking is, I'm not sure I really want to be doing this for a living. And of course, when we came to the end of it all, we hadn't got everything we needed. We had nearly run out of money, and we didn't have a finished short film at the end of it. So there was a feeling of defeat coming out of the short film, and knowing that we had probably had to raise some more money in order to finish. It was a bit of a bittersweet feeling, but the thing that we all really felt was that the footage that we had got was really, really exciting, and the material that we were producing, even though it was so difficult, that the images was exciting. At the end of it, that's what we were armed with, and that's what we were going to use to sort of keep the project going.
Hey guys, we're on the set of Ben Hur right now. At this very moment, we're filming right behind me. But here's the thing, we're going to need more money to make this film get finished. And the things we're going to need for is more food for crew, we're going to need more money for post-production, we might even need some more money for chairs.
Coming out of the short film and sort of having a meeting with Jess and thinking about where we were going to take the film, there were two trains of thought. We needed to get some more money to finish the short film, but it had been suggested by her, why don't we take this to a feature? And I remember thinking that that was not something that I was actually interested in doing, because to me, the feature that I wanted to make for Ben Hur was, this great big epic, $40 million movie. However, I had cut a trailer from the footage that we had done, and I showed that trailer to Michael at Odin's Eye Entertainment.
So Matthew and I had been trying to get another film up for quite some time, and we just couldn't make it happen at that time. So Matt, in the meantime, went and shot another film, or a short film it was, and as soon as he sent through some footage from it for me to have a look, I had a look and I was like, holy crap, this looks amazing. And I called up Matt and said, Matt, is there any way that we can do this as a feature film? And he said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, there's a 140-page script for it. Do you want to read it? And yeah, we went from there.
He wanted to take that short trailer to Toronto Film Festival and the American film market and start seeing what the response was in the marketplace. He really felt this should be a feature film and said, can you keep going and expand it into a longer form? So I figured out a way to do that, knowing that I couldn't make the entire Ben Hur feature that I wanted. Essentially what I did was I divided it into 3 sections, and I took the last act, the last 30 pages of that big Ben Hall script, and then I expanded that into a 2-hour movie. It required a complete rewrite. I needed to flesh out a lot of the characters that had either just sort of come and gone very quickly, or who didn't actually make an appearance at all in that first script, and created a whole new Ben Hall story that would only take place and cover the last 9 months of his life. So Michael Favell then pitched the project to Russell Cunningham, who was also involved in the other feature film that we were developing, to see if Russell would come on board to help produce this film.
In November of 2014, they came along and said, hey, would you have a look at The Legend of Ben Hall? It's a project that Matthew's been working on as well. I said, sure, I'll read it. I read it, I loved it. And when you read a screenplay, like I read screenplays, I don't read books. I've read 2 books in 30 some odd years. I'm not a book reader, but give me a script, and if I can turn it at the, a minute a page, I'm into it. And I was into Ben Hall from the beginning. And Odin's Eye Entertainment is a sales agent who took that to the Toronto Film Festival in 2014, and they loved what they saw, so much so that they said, this should be a motion picture, this should be a feature-length narrative, this should be, and Michael brought that back, and they had been trying to get up, but it was always difficult, because Australian Western, difficult. It's a difficult thing. But they introduced it to me, and I said, hey, I kind of feel a synergy, because it's a great Australian story. I've been here for 30 some odd years, and it was the first time I've actually read a story that looked and felt like it would fit in the US and fit internationally. Motion picture making in this country is absolutely difficult, and without question, Australia should be at the top of the ladder, but we're still struggling trying to find our way up. And so when you look at motion picture projects in this country of Australian content, Australian origin, it's always a tough task. And then to try to actually then go out and find the capital to actually make it is even tougher.
For the feature film this time, we weren't going to be able to raise enough money through crowdfunding again to finance it. So this was a film that was going to need to be financed with investors. We didn't want to go to the funding bodies. It was a process that was going to take too long, and we had a bit of a window where we thought if we needed to be filming by around about March. Otherwise we'll hit winter again. I had the calendar up on my wall, and it was circled pretty much. This was our D-Day. We had to finance by this date, and if we didn't, we missed our window. And we had all the cast and crew sort of waiting on standby, all waiting to see if this feature film was now going to happen. So those few months were pretty difficult, because we were actually preparing for a film that we didn't know if we were actually going to make.
I think I have a passion for filmmaking, which I did 20 or 30 years ago, and I never got really involved in it until only recently, when I funneled my way through a Kickstarter website. So I put my toe in the water really, and funded a small amount of money, right? And then I got really invested in it because I wanted to see it made. So I invested in it emotionally, I think. I just rang Matt and said, listen, you need to get over the line. So that's when I put in a bigger budget to get it over the line. So that allowed me to come play, and it's about play for me. It's not serious, and I suppose it's something I'd wanted to do myself over the years, but never quite organised myself enough or whatever. So Matt's done all the hard work, and I just can't get to play with him. So that's the best part. This is the most genuine energy that I've ever seen in any corporations or in lots of businesses or whatever. There's always a hierarchy, or there's someone doesn't get along. But this is just very harmonious, and I'm really surprised.
From late November to March 29th, 2015, not even 4 months, we were greenlit, done, ready to go. Contract signed, everybody on board, cast, crew, finance, a whole lot. So it was exciting because it happened so fast. You didn't have time to think about the fact that you've got to, beg, borrow, and steal. That happens later. But we didn't have to do that up front because the enthusiasm was there, the drive was there, the passion for Matthew and his project was behind everybody that actually signed on. So it was extraordinary. I've never in my life experienced a speed like that and an enthusiasm with every person we spoke to. And Matthew's got a great personality, and he's a great agitator bringing people to him. So casting, crewing, and all that were all part and parcel with Matthew's ability to actually draw attention to his project and gain the enthusiasm.
Everyone really embraced the project once more, and the team got back together.
The film's pre-production or planning began early 2015. We had a 3-week period, and this is where we had to work out as much as we can in detail on how we're going to shoot the film for the next 8 weeks or so that we had, which included 2 weeks in a studio.
I've always felt that storyboarding is very, very important because it's a way for me to direct the movie before I get out and direct the movie. So I actually storyboarded the entire film before I actually went out and shot it, and storyboarding actually took me longer to storyboard the movie than it did to actually go out and film it. So having made all of my decisions about where I'm going to put the camera and how I'm going to tell the story through the camera, that was really, really vital.
I had to literally go through every shot, every scene that Matt had storyboarded, which was, I think, over 1,500 storyboards, working out what the angle, how we're going to film it, what equipment to use, what lighting. And so, the first good week of that 3 weeks was just spent purely on trying to figure out how we're going to shoot this film.
As we finished with the short film and made the decision to go to the feature, it was a very different beast. In finding that as things expanded, we had more crew and I had a production team, that I could function better as a producer in stepping back and make sure that everyone had what they needed rather than doing what they needed.
When you include the footage that we had shot for the short film, The Legend of Ben Hall ended up shooting for around about 10 weeks. A very, very long shoot for a low-budget film. Most low-budget films will shoot for about 4 or 5 weeks if they're lucky. That's one of the challenges that we have as filmmakers, and especially here in Australia. We're expected to shoot films in 4 weeks. That really isn't enough time. I mean, to put it into perspective, you look at an American Western like the Magnificent Seven remake, they had 3 weeks to shoot a scene which ended up being 3 minutes long within their movie. And that was just one gunfight. So it really does show you the differences between making a film here in Australia and making a film in America, and what a large budget actually gives you. We were always faced with not enough time, not enough money. And those were the two things that, despite all odds, we just kept fighting against, and really, really fought hard to just make sure that we were, the material that we were creating looked really, really epic and really defied the budget that we were given.
Matt and I actually spent almost 2 weeks driving around different locations, trying to find the spots where we're going to film. And, this was really important to make sure that when we plan out how I shoot things, I have these locations in mind. So luckily we had really good property owners that let us use it, and the good thing was that the ones that we had available, it looked very natural.
The picture was shot in Victoria. I live in New South Wales. There's a great on-the-ground producer, Jessica Pierce, who worked closely with Matthew. And Matthew's role at the beginning was as a producer, so even though he wrote the screenplay, he still had the producer's cap on at the same time. And so he effectively had 2 producers on the ground in Victoria doing all the legwork. I would come over from time to time and make sure that the boxes were ticked, we're on the right page, moving in the right direction. Where we needed help, I would help. From a producer's point of view, in my position, it was just simply a case of making sure we were always a step ahead of the curve.
It was a very, very large cast for this film. I mean, most sort of low-budget films will have a cast of maybe a dozen people, but we had over 60 speaking roles. Quite a number of these roles had already been cast in the short film, so we just brought everybody back from that. But there was at least another 2/3 that hadn't been cast yet, so that meant a lot of casting. So I got Marnie Hill, who is a casting director, to help me. We had a very short amount of time to do it in, but it did give us the opportunity to start approaching some other actors and create a really good supporting cast.
I'd met the producers and Matt, obviously, over Skype a number of times regarding another project titled Territorial. And that's yet to happen, but in lieu of that happening, they decided to invite me down to shoot this for a week. The fact that it was shooting in outback Australia was fantastic to me. That was a great incentive because I'd been stuck in the monotony that is Los Angeles. There are cardboard boxes everywhere and industry professionals wherever you look. So this, for me, seemed like a real break. It was almost like a holiday. Being in a location like this is drastically different to shooting anywhere in Los Angeles because it has a very specific aesthetic and atmosphere, which I love. I mean, obviously I'm from Australia. Admittedly, my accent's a bit butchered. I'm sorry about that. But this has been extraordinary just because there's such a beautiful calmness about the Australian bush that I love, and it's a great contrast. It's comparative, at least, to the smaller projects in the US. It's very similar. Everyone is doing their job, everyone's very professional, so it's great. The only other thing I would say is that people here are more willing to have fun.
We only shot with Callum for about 2 days. So we had this very, very small window with Callum to get as much of his scenes as we could. So it meant we had to shoot the robbery scene in pretty much a day. And then we had a day for all his dramatic scenes.
I feel like every actor ever, whenever asked, even in an audition room or with the horse master, has said, yeah, I can ride a horse, I'm fine, I'm great. I was honest at the forefront and I said, look, I've ridden one a couple of times, but the horse is in control. I am not a good rider. And the first horse that I trained on, it was great. I got the hang of it, was galloping, was doing everything I needed to do. And then the next day, they had to give that horse to somebody else, one of the leads, which is understandable. And so I was given this little black pony-looking thing. And it didn't like me. It knew I couldn't ride properly, and it didn't like me. But fortunately, when we got on set, she knew that it was time to work, and she eased up a bit for me. Working with Matt has been good fun because he's young, or at least he comes off as quite young. Obviously, he knows what he's doing, but he very easily relates to someone of my age. He seems very professional on the outside, though I haven't been paying much attention. But
right.
So you can see he's got everyone on a really tight leash. So he's doing his job well. So far as preparation goes, for the most part, I did absolutely nothing. I was in Los Angeles. I assumed everything would go swimmingly, and it has gone swimmingly, though I remember on Skype, Matt had asked me, he said, what do you think you can do? Do you think you can, grow a beard and look a bit more like a bushranger? And I said, no, that's not going to happen. I grow a beard slower than, dead grass grows. So this is what's come through. This has come through, I think, like 2 months maybe? Two and a half months. I started growing this when he Skyped me, before we'd even confirmed that I was on this production. So, yeah, I'm not quite a real man just yet, but I can play a bushranger.
Immediately when I heard about it, I was just really excited about it because I grew up in New South Wales. So I remember in primary school, one of my projects was, believe it or not, on Ben Hall. Why? Why did I do a project on Ben Hall while other people were doing projects on dinosaurs and things like that? But there was something about Ben Hall that I was really drawn to because even at a young age, I realised this guy's kind of a gentleman and he's got guns and he seems like a bad guy, but he's not. And then they kill him. I don't know, I was really intrigued by that. But the biggest thing for me, the decision to do this, was that I've always believed that Australian Westerns, that genre, we should be able to have a really vibrant execution in film of this world of Australia, the beginnings of Australia. The Legend of Ben Hall to me is exciting because it's like a Western, and an Australian Western at that. And the fact that Matt has gone down the road of, no, I really want to find the perfect person for that role. I love the fact that the way he's cast it. He's gone for the authenticity of it. So how can you not be excited working with people like that?
Yeah, I was on the dole and applied for a job, and they said, yes, we have some Irish bushrangers going. No, I actually heard it off one of the young actors I teach. His mum mentioned it, and next thing I realised then that me and Matthew knew each other from 20 years ago, like when I was in his an animated film called Scam, which was amazing. It was such a cool film, So it just shows you don't know when you meet someone, if you're not an ass and they like you. 20 years later, when you're an old man, and the character happened to be called Old Man, which everyone says on set, Old Man, and we're on set doing it, so it's cool. That's what I love about the business. You just don't know who you meet, when it's going to come back. So yeah, I'm wrapped. It's great. And I was really happy when Matt told me it was Irish, because I love playing Irish characters, and I love his character, the fact that him and Ben Hall, they sort of teamed up together, and his part in this is like, because Ben's so attached to this intention that he has, that the old man can't get through to him. He's warning him of things to come and detrimental, and he just won't listen because he's so headstrong. So I just like those sort of scenes because it brings in real life. Like, he's a bushranger, but why is he like that? Because his wife left him. and that's just, it's part of life. Like relationships cause, a lot of it. Not that I'd know anything about that much.
The way that I sort of came across the film was the trailer after they shot the short film, and I was like, what is this story? It's so interesting, it's so captivating. Why have I not learnt about this before? This is so bizarre. He's so much more interesting in a way than Ned Kelly, because he was the Ned Kelly before Ned Kelly. And yeah, just this really interesting, broken kind of man who, when you read the script, you discover is a three-dimensional character, not just like, I'm a bad guy, I'm a bushranger, I do bad things. Like this really interesting man with a backstory about this broken family and what happened to him and why he turned to this life of crime. Yeah, it's been an amazing journey. And from learning about Ben Hall, I've learned about so many other things in Australian history that I probably wouldn't have learnt about otherwise. To be involved in a news story that a lot of people our age don't know about is such a cool thing. It's really special.
I auditioned for all three girls, but I'm so happy that I got Ellen, because I feel like I can do her the most justice. And playing a 17-year-old with such life and such confidence as well. I mean, I'm quite a confident person in real life as well. I'm not as flamboyant and out there as her. And it was good to really tap into that side of myself, and it's been really good. Jamie is playing a very unique character, and he's not like that in real life at all. It's interesting to see him on set, because it's beautiful how he takes that time to really get into character, and because he's so shy and introverted in real life, and it's beautiful how he can just tap into that straight away and get into it and commit so much to the role.
Yeah, I guess that ladies love a bad boy thing hasn't really changed too much.
Changed too much.
200 years. No. Yeah, still applies in some areas, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, Matt was fantastic. I said, because he had done so much research and there was so much details, and it wasn't like it was just for Ben Hall or just for the boys or anything. He knew every nook and cranny of every character sort of thing. So there was a lot of material that he was able to give to us. I said, to help us, I said, with our character development, that that it would have taken us years and years to track down. Yes. I said, but because he'd already put that time in, his enthusiasm, I said, you get caught up in that as well. I said, he kind of fuels you as well.
He makes you feel important, and he makes your character feel important.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely.
Even like you could be such a small character, and you would have so much importance in that scene that you're doing.
Going back to the Binder Ball, I said, in all these wonderful, wonderful layers of dresses and beautiful high-heeled shoes, and getting used to wearing multiple petticoats was definitely unusual.
Yes.
And
very heavy. Massively heavy. Yeah.
Five. I've got 5 petticoats.
Yeah.
5 petticoats.
Yeah, and the scene where I had to climb up on the bar, Matt's like, okay, just do this and jump up on the bar. I'm like, Matt, you don't understand how heavy this dress is.
I spent 10 years living about 60 kilometres northwest of Forbes, a little town called Trundle. So when I was a kid, the Ben Hall story was well known to me. It was actually taught in our local school, and he was often spoken of with quite a degree of pride as well. It's something that's always intrigued me as well, because he is such an interesting figure. I've always thought that it would translate into an amazing Australian film, one that should have been done probably 40 years ago. In Australia, opportunities like this to make a story like this, they just don't come along every day. They don't even come along every year here. So the opportunity to play someone who is almost one of the catalysts for why Ben Hall became the way he was really intriguing to me. I think I came in on set in Block 2 at a time when a lot of the actors and the crew were really feeling the heat. And I can remember walking onto set and just seeing a lot of exhausted people, but they were still going for it. They still, even though they were exhausted, there was still this determination of everyone wanting to just get together and make this thing, happen. You know what I mean? Yeah, I was incredibly impressed with just the stamina and the dedication that everyone had on set at that time, because it was tough.
The hardest challenge is always weather. You know, you're faced with days when you're trying desperately to hope that it stays sunny, you know, because it's obviously easier for light. With cloudy days and a bit of sun, you can control your lighting. I mean, we had days where it rained. I still remember one morning we were shooting till about 1 a.m. in the most freezing cold wind like you wouldn't believe, in a paddock that was in the middle of nowhere, and I was just in awe of the fact that everybody stuck it out, everybody pushed. Nobody got sick, nobody got injured, which is a key thing with me. My top priority is always safety of cast and crew, then safety of data, and then make a great motion picture. That's my 3 rules, that's it. And we managed that in every instance.
We had literally over 2 hour movie to shoot in 8 weeks. Not only battling the amount of shots and scenes we had to shoot per day, but also just the weather, like just physically trying to achieve a goal. And you know, those kind of things, sometimes you're trying to tell your body to keep going, but it just won't, so because it's too cold or too windy or things like that. So you know, we had probably the 3 worst days of the shoot was when we shot all those scenes where the big boulders are, which is in Lansfield, and we literally came back every day. It looked like we've had our faces burnt off because it was just the wind.
There was some really, really windy days, which a lot of people will talk about, where we struggled to stand up. Our environment was just pounding us at every single moment. Being in Victoria, we would have rain in the morning and then 40-degree days during the day, and then we'd get wiped out by a storm at the end of the day. And we'd all go back home, go to sleep, wake up and do it again the next day, rain, hail or shine. My day started between 3 and 4 in the morning, get up and then go to base, have my breakfast quickly, and then basically go through all the gear, make sure everything's ready to go. And then we'd have to be on set usually between 6:30, 7. And on the days, you know, it was about just maintaining that level of pressure to make sure that, you know, we do knock out 50 to 60 setups a day. You know, it was hard on the actors too, because, you know, for them they only got 3-4 takes, or sometimes 2 or even 1 take, because we had to catch up.
So what it did, it forced the shoot to be really compressed, which meant that we were shooting really quickly. I was shooting a lot in a day, so preparation was a huge challenge. You know, finishing really late and then trying to prepare a whole bunch of scenes for the next day. So just staying up to date with what I had to do, what I had to learn for the next day. I was pretty much on the cusp for the entire shoot, just keeping my head above water.
Yeah, I had it pretty easy. I had it pretty easy because of the fact that my character doesn't really do a lot of horse riding or shooting. He sort of just chills at the back and then betrays Ben Hull.
So going into this, we did some horse riding last year, but this year we were able to get like a week of extensive training, and that really helped with like confidence and how to be around horses and how to manage horses and how to interact with them. Also, I had a bit of gun training in the sense of I had to learn to twirl guns on my fingers, because that was something that Matt really wanted. He's like, you know, I want him to be really flashy. So Matt gave me a gun to practice with one of the replicas, and I had to, you know, 10 times on this finger, 10 times on that finger, then backwards, and I did that for like 3 weeks, a month of just doing that every day. So hopefully it paid off. And the great thing is that Matt has a very clear vision of what he wants, so we don't really go into a scene going, okay, what's happening? You know, it's kind of like Matt has a vision of, okay, this is what's happening, la 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 la. It's like, okay, all right, and then we'll do it.
Most of the time, even if you don't hear him, you will see him do your role. You could just stand about 20 metres back, but see what you've got to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And whip out your guns, and then ride with one hand, and then shoot.
I've never seen him do that though.
No, but I just love it when he says it's like it's so easy to do. So it makes us feel that it's easy, and that's the best thing.
The challenges of playing a real life character, I think, has to be left behind, and we have to trust.
Yeah.
We need to trust ourselves and our work.
You can't really, I mean, no one really knows what that person was like in 1864, 1865. So you just go by what you have, and that, you know, everything is an interpretation, you know, any art form is an interpretation, so there's not much you can do.
except maybe being rung up by the family and said you did a terrible job.
The way that we approached the sets and so on for the film, because everything had to be built, because there's nothing of this time period that actually exists anymore that you can use, with the exception of some old film sets that were still standing. Really, we had to build everything that you see.
The challenges surrounding the external builds, well, when Matt was initially said we need to build, you know, these 2 exterior huts plus the commercial hotel, I just thought it was a pipe dream.
We decided that we would build our huts really just as 2-sided facades out on location, but the interiors would be done in the studio.
So shooting a film in the 1860s, there's a lot of material that is still available, and then there's also a lot that just doesn't exist anymore. We were lucky that the timber mills all still ran the same, so they're all still cutting half rounds, so we're able just to salvage half rounds and we could replicate huts from that. Yeah, again, just with a few builders down there, a couple of weeks of salvaging materials from wherever we could get it. The Collector Hotel was an interesting building to make, mainly because of the historical significance of it and wanting to get that as accurate as we possibly could. Matt had previously found like a reference photo from late 1800s, so we were able to judge from that what we needed to do. We created the look of the brick building by starting with shipping containers and then building facade on top of those shipping containers, which was basically plaster moulding, and then having all that basically stapled or, you know, bolted to the facade, you know, aging that in as well as much as we could. Getting the sets ready in time for filming was quite a bit of a challenge. There was one point with the Collector's Hotel, we were still putting the fence in as Dunn was getting his shot, as he runs up the fence and takes shot at the, I think it's police sergeant or the constable, just out of frame every time. We managed to widen the frame every time because me and Billy, one of the other art department, were standing there holding the fence and then bolting and pitching the fence all during takes. So yeah, that was one interesting aspect to it.
The set designs, you know, Daz Patterson, who was probably one of the most ingenious production designers I've come across. The guy is a magic maker. I mean, when we went into Docklands and I saw the net result of his work, it was extraordinary.
The Docklands are very much into supporting local productions and local content, so they opened up their doors to us and we were able to shoot for 2 weeks at the Docklands studios, and Daz Patterson and his art team built all these sets that we needed. So pretty much any time we were in an interior, it was done at the Docklands. It was a really welcome experience to be shooting in a studio.
We had 3 main sets and we had 13 sets in total. Out of the hut set that we built, we got 7 sets out of that, 7 interiors, and then out of the hotel, we got 2 interiors. The Binder Bowl, we got the Brettle Bane in. That was a big challenge. We're shooting here, we're rejigging this. We're shooting here, we're rejigging this. So
we just built one hut with windows and doors and a fireplace that could all be interchanged and moved. We would shoot in one hut for the day, that would be the Connolly's hut. And then at the end of the day, Darcy and his team would move all the doors and the windows and the fireplace around, change the furniture, dress it differently. Peter would then come in the morning and light it differently, and it would be a whole different set. The production really did force us to find very creative ways to use, you know, the materials that we had creatively. Of course, we are trying to fool the audience into thinking that this hut is out in the middle of nowhere, but that's just a testament to Peter Sylvester's lighting abilities, that he was able to match them seamlessly.
Back then they didn't have electricity, so the lighting has to be things like from fire and candles or just moonlight and sunlight. You know, that's the kind of things they had sources as well. So that's sort of where my inspirations came from, especially for this film.
We were able just to keep dressing them and keep lighting them differently in order to you know, make this world seem a lot bigger than what it really was.
throughout the whole thing, the horses, the cast, the crew, everybody was spot on. I mean, the authenticity of the costuming, you know, through Michael Chisholm's great work, and Frankie Hogan, who, you know, jumped on when Michael couldn't actually do the day-to-day, made it possible for us to actually recreate 1860s with the most authentic costumes Australia has to offer. You know, and a great costuming team that actually managed to do it day in, day out, from wigs, beards, hats, all the accessories, everything again, you know, was just amazing.
Getting authentic weapons for the film was one of the biggest challenges that we did have from sort of an art department side of things. The problem with weapons of this time period is these items are extremely valuable, very, very rare, and also very, very fragile.
There's an historical component where we have to research, you know, correct historical properties. So make sure that they're absolutely faithful to the story, to the timeline. The firearms that we have, they're faithful to the main characters. We have an identical pistol to the one that Ben Hall favoured and used and died with. It's a Tranter percussion revolver. And we have the very piece, not his personal firearm, but the same model. And we've made versions of it in plastic to get us over the line, so we've got some rough and tumble versions. We have the same firearms that the troopers actually had on the day. Again, you know, replica / model versions of those, but they are faithful reproductions of the very firearms that were used on both sides of the conflict.
We did things like taking moulds of guns and making fake ones. We had model makers from Adelaide building us replica guns, essentially toys, basically out of wood and plastic and things like that, and painted up to look real.
To get all of them was probably the hardest part. You can always find 1, 3s or 5s, but to get the kind of numbers that we needed was a little problematic. But like any project, if you have time and a very supportive budget, you can do anything. This film is being shot more on heart than money. We've really, you know, to use the cliche, punched over our weight on this one. In no small way thanks to Matthew in giving us the latitude to move in all directions to make it happen. Comes with its problems, comes with its uncertainties, but it comes with a lot of, you know, heart, soul and good times as well. This one's just stacked to the gunnels with heart and soul. It really is, and it's a lot of fun to be on.
Most of the movie we could not fire these guns, so our actors were performing all these action scenes very much just sort of going click, click, click.
Which was even more difficult because we're fake shooting. So we're just kind of pointing and doing that and trying to get the recoil right so that you can put the visual effects in later. And when you're trying to do that, it's interesting because you end up making the bang noise with your mouth and the camera picks it up. And
we had to go to digital technology to superimpose some gunfire onto those shots. So pretty much all the shots and the gunshots in the movie were done that way.
And even if you're not firing blank fire, for example, there's a lot of other risks because today, for example, we had multiple cars running through the bush. Sounds innocuous, but it's not. I mean, tripping hazards are huge, and if you were to fall on that rifle, you know, and impale yourself or knock out a tooth. So a lot of the risks are often not that obvious. 50% at least of what I do is risk assessment, first and foremost. You know, most people probably think you just procure items and take them on set and then head straight to the coffee machine. Anything but the truth.
The one I remember the most is the scene where Ben Hall dies. Not just because of its, you know, emotional capacity, but also because it was really difficult to do. We had, I think, 4 runs at it, and for scheduling or weather, every time it kind of didn't happen, and I would be preparing myself to die. And then when we did finally do it, we squashed it into 2 days, and they were full days, and it was a lot of running in the sun in a big wool jacket, pretty much from one side of a paddock to the other and back again, and we had 2 units going. But then when we had to do the gunshots, we'd have these things called squibs, which are little fireworks with bud packs, so that when I'd get shot, they'd, you know, explode out of my chest or my leg or wherever I was being shot. And when we did that, again, due to funding, we pretty much only got 1 shot at it each time because the squibs, you know, cost money. So we'd stop both units and everybody would get to one spot, and then when everybody goes quiet and you've got a crowd of 40 people watching you and you've got 2 cameras on you and then all the behind the scenes cameras as well, and you know you've got 1 shot at it, goes completely quiet, and then all you can hear is your heartbeat going absolutely nuts. And if you've got these adrenaline spikes, plus all the running and the heat, you're absolutely wrecked by the end of the day. It's easily the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
Because of the scope of the movie that we were trying to do, and also the fact that we didn't have the money to do everything that we wanted, one of the things I turned to was miniatures in order to sort of expand the world. This was mostly used when we did the town of Binder. I put it to Das Patterson, and I think he was a little bit apprehensive when I first mentioned it to him, and I said, why don't we build a little model village of Binder? We don't have to make them very, very precise. We can make them all out of sticks and twigs and bark and things like that. We could shoot it in a special way, superimpose and green screen some actors in there, and we can sell the illusion. So we ended up spending about a week or so, and we just got all these volunteer model makers to all come in and help us build about 12 huts. We spent about 3 nights out at a friend's paddock, essentially setting up this model village and then lighting it in a certain way, shooting it in a certain way, but we were hampered by weather, and it was in the middle of summer, and we didn't think we were going to have any weather issues, but we had a lot of wind and we had rain, and of course that kept destroying the models. So we ended up having to constantly keep redressing, setting up, go to film that night, the winds would come in, the rain would come in, so we'd have to cover it all back over and then come back the next night and keep going. Yeah, it was, I didn't think that the models would be that much of a challenge, but in the end they did look quite convincing, and was able to expand a world in a way that we couldn't afford.
I came to learn about Ben Hall after I watched Matt's short film The Artifice, which terrified me because it was a really great horror short film, and I knew I just wanted to get involved in a project with Matt.
And he sent me a whole bunch of music that he had written. And I found myself liking his music so much, I was listening to it all the time on my iTunes playlist. He had the ability to create really fantastic melodies, and was also able to take scores that were all created in the computer and make them sound like they were done by a live orchestra. And that's a very hard thing to fool somebody, but I thought Ronnie had that ability to do that.
And Matt always said that the score for Ben Hall should be theme-driven, have an epic sound to it. And so the big challenge in composing the score was to make it sound like we actually had an orchestra. If the movie I'm working on has budget restrictions and they can't afford the London Symphony Orchestra or something like that, you have to fake it as good as you can. When I work on a score, I spend most of my time on the actual mixing process to make it sound real. Like all the big composers, they have an orchestra at their disposals. And I had nothing, I just had the Mac.
His enthusiasm and his passion for what he does, and also for the film, is just so prevalent in his work. He just went above and beyond to create the score that he did.
For me, the score is the most important part of a film, because it can make or break a film. And that's why I also loved working with Matt, because right from the start I realized that he's actually appreciating the score of a film as much as I do. The collaborative aspect is actually what I love the most about the whole composing process, because once I talk to a director and he tells me the ideas, in my head I immediately start forming themes and ideas and stuff, and just to bring the director's ideas to life, that's the challenge that I love the most.
The edit went on probably twice as long as what we thought it was going to, simply because of the enormous amount of material that we were dealing with. It was definitely a very, for me, a very frustrating process, I think, the post-production, because that really is where the movie, you can either make it or you can break it. One of the things that we discovered earlier on, when Caitlin, our editor, and myself had put the movie together, was that it was running at about 3 hours and 40 minutes long. That's just taking all of the scenes and sort of banging them all together roughly. We had to cut about an hour and a half out of this film. Very quickly we had to make some tough decisions on what scenes had to go, what characters had to be taken out and so on, and to really where we had to focus the movie in order to achieve that. But I always felt that this was a very, very big film. This was never going to be a story that you could fit into 90 minutes, which is a much more traditional running time for movies in Australia, but internationally, you know, westerns and dramas like this, they do run over 2 hours. And so I was very adamant that we should be, you know, we need to tell the story in the right amount of time, and if it needs to be over 2 hours, then it needs to be over 2 hours.
You know, getting the film made is a challenge enough. Getting a film in the can is a challenge. Getting it finished and getting the story working the way it needs to work, so it's not too long, too short, you know, getting that balance right, it's never an easy thing. And you know, there was a lot of discussion about, okay, well, what should stay in the movie, what should go out of the movie. You gain one thing and then you lose another because you've chopped something out of the film. There's no perfect solution, so it's a series of compromises, and I think, you know, that's from my perspective, that's what producing is. It's, you know, really being a facilitator and making compromises that don't damage the overall integrity of what the director's vision is.
There was and is this perception out there in the Australian film industry that when you go over 90 minutes, people sort of gasp and hold their breath and go, oh my God, it's how long? But I really did feel that The Legend of Ben Hall had the scope and the story and the characters to sustain a good solid 2-hour film, and that really was sitting in where most westerns come in at. You'll be surprised at how much resistance I faced. There were a lot of people throwing their hat into the ring, a lot of people giving their opinions, and a lot of people pressuring the film to not only come down in length, but also there was a lot of pressures on the outside that were starting to affect the story. I had managed to maintain all the way through my vision of this being very historically accurate, and history doesn't really want to conform to a traditional 3-act structure easily. I had done it, but there's still something very unconventional about real life.
Because everybody said, oh, it's 2 hours 19, it's so long. I'm going like, seriously? Seriously? You know, Australia's westerns typically are 90 to 110 minutes, and American westerns are typically 120 to 135 minutes. So we were in the ballpark of American western storytelling, you know, and for Ben Hall at 2 hours 19, that was the vision of Matthew Holmes. And I supported it right down to the very end. No matter who's negative, I don't care. You know, they don't know his vision, they don't know his background, they don't know his story, they don't know anything at all. And when you know all the fundamental bits and pieces, and you know that you're trying to tell 9 months of the most infamous bushranger in Australia's history in, you know, 2 hours and a bit, that's a tough task. You know, and originally it was 3 hours. Then it went down to 2 hours 24, then down to 2 hours 6. We squashed it down to, and then Matthew was starting to say, like, you're taking away the essence of the story. And we said, have a little bit back. And he got back. And the end result is, you know, an acceptable product that he's happy with, I'm happy with, and audiences get to choose as to whether they're happy with.
You know, it's a combination always of, you know, art and commerce. You can never really have both. But I'm really proud of what we did as a group, and, you know, audiences are enjoying the film, and at the end of the day, that's all that matters.
What I felt that we had done was kept the purity of the Ben Hall story, and we had kept, you know, we had kept that intact. And so I was willing to stand by that and say, no, this is what audiences are going to want. Despite conventional thinking, this is what audiences are going to want, and this is what this story needs to be.
Most important reason for telling the Ben Hall story is to get Australia back in touch with our history. There are so many more things out there that I want to know about Australian history now that I wasn't even prompted to before this, and I feel the film will have that same impact for the Australian audience, because we do learn a lot about history of other countries through film. I think Australia's got to catch up with that.
The Australian film industry at the moment, I think, is going through a massive change in how we're viewing our own films and what type of films we're making. I think we're starting to see now with some of the films that have had the success over the last year or so, that we have the potential to make such more interesting and different style of films. And I think Ben Hall is hopefully a part of that as well.
Ben Hall, the film, has a very unique place in the Australian kind of realm of film. The thing about Australian films, no offense, is that sometimes In the past, Australian films play it safe with stories, with what they produce. You know, there's not a lot of period pieces that are done.
I think it's quite unique. The way that we've made it is, no, I haven't really seen anything like it before. And again, I'm not just saying that, you don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing yet, but it's definitely unique.
A lot of Australians don't know anything about Ben Hall. They don't even know, you mentioned Ben Hall and they say, who's that? You know, Australian history, that's what they want to hear, that's what they want to see. They want to be proud the fact that, you know, we've got history, that's rich stories, and I really, really do hope that it will go to schools for educational purposes. I really do hope that it will go there and teach students a little bit more about Australian history.
Often gets glossed over a lot. Often it gets doctored in a certain way, you know what I mean? And in this film, you know, the history is in front of you. It's all around you. And Matt hasn't tried to hide any of the negative parts about our Australian history as well.
And I think that just sit back and enjoy it. That's what it's there for. It's a film to be enjoyed. You know, we're not trying to be political or anything. We're just trying to tell the story of what actually happened, and then you decide. You know, you decide whether you think the cops did the right thing, or whether you think, you know, he was a good man, or maybe you think he wasn't a good man. It doesn't matter. It's just a great opportunity to learn a bit about the history of us.
He's not a bad man making bad choices or a good man making good choices. He's a good man in a bad position that makes bad choices. And I think that's something that people identify with quite easily, in that, you know, every day we're trying to make decisions of the right or good thing to do, and we don't always make that decision. So, you know, the Western genre in general, I think, is filled with those characters and that's why people find them so interesting.
Stories are about, you know, good and bad. And America has done a great job of creating legends out of monsters. You know, Jesse James is a monster. I mean, yeah, there's lots of gunslingers that were monsters. They're not nice people, but they make for nice storytelling, because for every bad part of a story, there's a good side. You know, in the storytelling of a Western like that, in an Australian story, and trying to connect with a global audience, all the ingredients are there. And Matthew's done a great job of taking that story and presenting it on a plate for everybody to eat at.
Cultural attitudes of the day then are very different to what it is now. So there's very little tolerance for criminality now. There's not too many criminal folk heroes. Back then, bushrangers, particularly in the early days, were seen as folk heroes, and they had a lot of sympathy from the rural poor, young people in particular.
Another reason that people are attracted to criminals is because they live this fast and exciting life that potentially we don't get the chance to ever live. People are fascinated by wild animals as well, that hopefully we'll never see. But it's just interesting to know that these things exist out there.
There's no other reason to glamorize and glorify what is essentially quite a dirty profession, living in the bush and robbing people. But it's that sense of freedom. You know, I don't answer to anyone. This is what I'm doing because this is what I want to do. This is me. As opposed to just conforming into a society and being told where to go, what to do, and how to do it. I think that's what people relate to and end up glorifying. It's just the freedom. You're completely independent. Completely independent. You answer to nobody.
You fantasize about being an actor and working on big, exciting films, and that was what this was. It was running around in the dirt, sweating, bleeding, you know, it was so exciting. And yeah, it was hard. Yeah, it was no sleep, super early mornings, beating sun, you know, without any shade, falling over, rolling your ankle, like it was all that stuff. But as an actor, that's what you live for. That's what you dream about doing. And honestly, it was just like the best project to work on. And it will always have a very special place in my heart.
I'm actually very proud now to be part of, as a Swiss guy, I'm really proud to be part of an Australian character with such rich history.
We had good fortune constantly on Ben Hall, constantly. When we thought some things couldn't be done, good fortune came back. And when you get that, you ride it.
We had pulled together such a great team of people. It was definitely a very, very enriching experience, I think, going through it. A great learning experience. I mean, you know, I tell all filmmakers, go out and make a film, because it doesn't matter if the film is good or not, you're going to learn something. I think it's a testament to what people can do when they all just decide that it doesn't matter what conventional thinking says can or cannot be done. I think The Legend of Ben Hall is a testament to everybody saying, you know what, we're going to make it happen, even though you know, we believe in it, we believe in ourselves, and we believe in this film, and by hook or by crook, we're going to make it happen. And I think there is the true spirit and the story behind The Legend of Ben Hall.